On a cool September night in 2014, Charlottesville, Virginia pulsed with the restless energy of college life. Students filled the streets, laughter echoed outside bars, and music drifted from open doors into the crisp air. Among the crowd was Hannah Graham, an 18-year-old second-year student at the University of Virginia. Known for her intelligence, kindness, and free spirit, she had her whole life ahead of her. That night, Hannah joined friends at an off-campus party. She was vibrant, smiling, but as the hours stretched into the early morning, fatigue and alcohol dulled her energy. At around midnight, she texted a friend saying she was lost on her way home. Surveillance cameras later captured her walking alone through downtown Charlottesville, sometimes weaving, sometimes steady, until she disappeared into the night. Those blurry images would become crucial clues in the investigation. By morning, when Hannah didn't return to her apartment and missed plans with friends, alarm bells began to ring. At first, hope lingered that she had simply stayed with someone she knew, but as the hours turned into days, worry spread across campus and beyond. Flyers plastered light poles, social media erupted with pleas for information, and police launched one of the largest search operations the city had ever seen. Volunteers combed fields, neighborhoods, and wooded areas, desperate for any sign of her. News outlets descended on Charlottesville, broadcasting her story nationwide. The image of Hannah, bright eyes, auburn hair, and a youthful smile, became a haunting reminder of how quickly someone could vanish. What no one knew then was that Hannah's path had fatally crossed with a man named Jesse Matthew, a local with a dark past hidden beneath the surface of charm. Surveillance footage revealed him walking beside Hannah that night, guiding her toward his car. To many, he seemed like a good Samaritan, offering help to a lost student. In reality, he was a predator. For weeks, Hannah's family clung to fading hope while investigators unraveled a sinister puzzle. As leads grew scarce, fear mounted that this was no simple disappearance. Something much darker had taken Hannah away, and the community braced itself for the truth that would soon emerge from the shadows. The search for Hannah Graham quickly became a community-wide mission, pulling together police officers, volunteers, students, and complete strangers who felt compelled to help. Helicopters hovered over rural landscapes, K-9 units swept through dense woods, and divers searched rivers and reservoirs, each day bringing fresh waves of effort and exhaustion. Hannah's parents, devastated but determined, stood before cameras pleading for information, their voices cracking with desperation, but anchored by unwavering love. Every press conference carried a mix of hope and heartbreak, as if each new day might finally bring answers or crush them further under the weight of silence. Across campus, candlelight vigils illuminated the night, thousands of flickering flames representing not just Hannah's life, but also the shared fear of vulnerability among young students. It was no longer just about one girl. It was about the chilling reminder that danger could hide in plain sight, even in a familiar college town. As the investigation pressed forward, a disturbing name began surfacing again and again: Jesse Matthew. To many in the community, he was a seemingly ordinary man, a nursing assistant, a former football player, someone who blended easily into the background. But beneath the surface, whispers and records hinted at a troubling past. Years earlier, he had been linked to assaults and misconduct, yet somehow evaded serious consequences. Investigators uncovered surveillance footage showing Hannah walking beside him, her small frame dwarfed by his larger build, and suspicion sharpened into dread. Still, the search continued, stretching into weeks, until the city seemed caught between hope and despair. The longer Hannah remained missing, the more the question shifted from where she was to what had happened to her. Anxiety rippled through Charlottesville as parents warned their children to stay close, and students traveled in pairs, glancing over their shoulders at shadows that suddenly felt threatening. News coverage turned relentless. keeping Hannah's face on every screen, her disappearance a national headline. Yet despite the efforts, no trace of her appeared, only the tightening circle of evidence around Jesse Matthew, a man who seemed to hold the answers, and perhaps the key to a nightmare no one wanted to believe was real. In the weeks that followed, investigators intensified their focus on Jesse Matthew, unraveling the layers of his life like pieces of a sinister puzzle. They learned that on the very night Hannah vanished, witnesses had seen Matthew behaving strangely, hovering near bars, watching vulnerable women, and then leaving suddenly after being spotted with Hannah. Police tracked his movements and searched his apartment, seizing clothing, fibers, and vehicles for forensic testing. Each item carried the potential to unlock the truth. The public, gripped by fear, watched as Matthew's face appeared on wanted posters and news broadcasts. He quickly became not only a person of interest, but the central figure in a haunting narrative. Detectives noted his troubling history. He had been accused of sexual assault on multiple occasions during his years at 2 different universities, yet administrative failures and lack of conclusive evidence allowed him to walk away each time without criminal charges. Now, those overlooked warnings returned with chilling relevance. As the manhunt escalated, Matthew fled town, sparking a nationwide alert. Days later, he was captured on a beach in Galveston, Texas, hiding out and living in his car. His arrest brought a strange mix of relief and dread, relief that he could no longer vanish into the crowd, and dread of what his capture might confirm. For Hannah's family, the uncertainty remained unbearable. Though Matthew was in custody, their daughter was still missing, her fate concealed somewhere in the rural sprawl beyond the city. Teams of searchers pushed into cornfields, scoured abandoned buildings, and trekked across farmland, following the faintest of leads. For weeks hope flickered in the distance, only to be crushed by false alarms and dead ends. The silence surrounding Hannah's disappearance was deafening, as though the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for the terrible secret to be uncovered. And then, nearly 6 weeks later, that silence was broken when a search team made a grim discovery. Human remains, hidden in a remote, overgrown field outside Charlottesville. Though it would take time for forensic confirmation, the community already knew. The story had shifted from a desperate search to a devastating loss. Hannah Graham had been found, but not as anyone had prayed. The confirmation that the remains belonged to Hannah Graham sent shockwaves through Charlottesville and beyond. The community that had once clung to hope was now forced to confront the brutal reality of her fate. Forensic teams descended on the rural field where she was found, collecting evidence piece by piece as investigators reconstructed the final moments of her life. The grim discovery brought both closure and heartbreak for Hannah's family, who had endured weeks of agonizing uncertainty. Now they faced the devastating truth that their daughter's story had ended in violence. Vigils were held once more, this time in mourning rather than hope, with thousands gathering to honor Hannah's memory, laying flowers, lighting candles, and whispering prayers into the autumn night. The case against Jesse Matthew grew heavier with each passing day. Forensic analysis tied him to Hannah through DNA evidence, and investigators began connecting him to other unsolved crimes in Virginia. Chilling parallels emerged between Hannah's disappearance and the 2009 abduction and murder of Morgan Harrington, another young woman who vanished after a concert in Charlottesville. Both had ended in remote wooded areas, both linked by the same man. The revelations painted Matthew not as a one-time offender, but as a predator who had slipped through cracks in the system for years. As the weight of evidence mounted, prosecutors built a case that left little room for doubt. For many in the community, anger replaced sorrow, anger at Matthew, but also at the institutions that had failed to stop him sooner. Parents wondered aloud how many red flags had been ignored, how many lives might have been saved if justice had intervened earlier. Still, amid the outrage, there was also resilience. Students rallied to create programs promoting safety, awareness, and reform, determined that Hannah's legacy would not be defined only by tragedy. Yet the haunting truth lingered. One night, in a city filled with life and laughter, a young woman's path had crossed with a predator, and the outcome had changed countless lives forever. The courtroom became the stage where the haunting story of Hannah Graham's final night was laid bare. Prosecutors presented chilling evidence, surveillance footage that tracked Hannah's steps, DNA samples linking her to Jesse Matthew, and witness accounts that placed the two together in the critical hours before she vanished. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of Matthew's defense, painting a portrait of a man who preyed on vulnerability under the guise of friendliness. The jury listened in silence, the air thick with the gravity of the case. Hannah's parents, seated only feet away from the man accused of taking their daughter's life, endured every moment with a mix of pain and determination, their faces etched with grief, but their presence a symbol of unwavering strength. The trial was not only about Hannah, it was about Morgan Harrington and possibly others, whose cases bore Matthew's signature of cruelty. Forensic experts testified about patterns too similar to ignore, laying out the predator's history piece by piece. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered daily, holding signs, sharing tears, and waiting for updates. Media trucks lined the streets, broadcasting every new development across the nation. The public's fascination was not just with the crime itself, but with the horrifying realization that a man with such a trail of accusations had roamed free for years. As testimony unfolded, the once murky picture of Jesse Matthews' past became painfully clear. Disciplinary reports, failed investigations, and missed opportunities to stop him long before Hannah's disappearance. His history revealed not just the crimes of one man, but the failures of institutions meant to protect the vulnerable. Finally, after weeks of evidence and heart-wrenching testimony, the verdict came. Jesse Matthew was found guilty of abducting and murdering Hannah Graham, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in a complex mix of relief, sorrow, and anger. Relief that justice had finally been served, sorrow that Hannah's life had ended so young, and anger that it had taken so long for the system to act. Yet, even with the conviction, one truth remained unshakable. Nothing could bring Hannah back. Though the verdict brought a measure of justice, the aftermath of Hannah Graham's case lingered like an open wound across Virginia and beyond. Her death sparked a national conversation about campus safety, institutional accountability, and the countless young women whose stories echoed similar patterns of danger and neglect. Universities across the country began reevaluating their protocols, realizing that what happened to Hannah could happen anywhere, to anyone. At the University of Virginia, administrators introduced new safety initiatives, late-night transportation services, expanded security patrols, and awareness programs aimed at protecting students walking alone at night. Yet for many, these measures felt like too little, too late, a reaction to tragedy rather than a true prevention of it. Hannah's parents, John and Sue Graham, emerged as advocates, their grief transformed into determination. They spoke openly about their daughter's life and legacy, urging communities to never forget the human cost behind headlines and statistics. Their voices carried not only sorrow, but a call to action, demanding better systems to protect the vulnerable. Meanwhile, Jesse Matthew remained behind bars, his name forever tied to the darkness that stole Hannah's future. But even as justice was served, the psychological impact of the case spread like ripples through the community. Students spoke of how their lives changed, how they avoided certain streets, traveled in groups, or kept phones clutched in their hands when walking alone at night. Parents sent their children off to college with heavier hearts, more fearful than before. Memorials for Hannah continued each year, moments where candles flickered and stories were shared of her kindness, her laughter, her dreams of making the world a better place. These tributes served as reminders that she was not just a victim, but a vibrant young woman whose presence had touched countless lives. And so, while the courtroom chapter had closed, Hannah's story lived on, in reform sparked by her loss, in the voices of those demanding change, and in the bittersweet memory of a young woman who vanished into the night, but whose legacy refused to fade. As time moved forward, the name Hannah Graham remained etched into the collective memory of Charlottesville, not just as a tragic victim, but as a symbol of resilience and change. Her disappearance and death were not forgotten. They became a constant reminder that vigilance and accountability are essential in communities everywhere. Students walking through the brick pathways of the University of Virginia still passed by memorials, small tokens left in her honor. Flowers, photos, and handwritten notes tucked into corners of campus as quiet tributes. Professors spoke her name when discussing safety initiatives, and new students were told her story during orientations, not to frighten them, but to remind them of the importance of looking out for one another. National organizations dedicated to victim advocacy often referenced Hannah's case, using it to push forward legislation aimed at strengthening protections against sexual predators. In many ways, she had become the face of a movement, her loss galvanizing reforms that might save others. Yet behind the legacy and advocacy was the human truth. A family forever changed, parents who would never see their daughter graduate, marry, or pursue her dreams. For them, the passage of time did not dull the ache. It simply reshaped it into a different kind of endurance. They chose to honor Hannah by keeping her spirit alive through scholarships, speaking engagements, and community initiatives. Each effort carried the same unspoken message. Hannah's life mattered, and her story would not disappear into the silence. Meanwhile, Jesse Matthew lived out his days behind prison walls, his presence a reminder of the evil that had lurked so close and the system that had failed to stop him sooner. For many, that part of the story was the hardest to reconcile. But beyond the darkness, there remained the light of Hannah's memory, a young woman who loved her friends, her family, and the world she was just beginning to explore. Though her life was stolen, her legacy became a beacon, urging others to never look away, never stay silent, and never forget that even in the face of tragedy, change can be born. Years after Hannah Graham's tragic disappearance, her story continues to echo in the lives of those she touched and the countless others who never knew her personally but were moved by her case. Charlottesville itself bears invisible scars, quiet reminders of a night when innocence was shattered and a community was forced to confront the lurking presence of a predator. Students still speak of Hannah in hushed tones, especially freshmen, who hear her story as both a cautionary tale and a rallying cry for vigilance. Her parents remain tireless advocates, transforming their unimaginable loss into a mission to protect others, often addressing universities and communities about the lessons learned from Hannah's case. Each time they speak, their words cut through the air with raw honesty, underscoring that behind every headline is a human life filled with love, dreams, and potential. Memorial runs, awareness campaigns, and safety initiatives now carry Hannah's name, keeping her memory alive not only in Charlottesville but across the nation. Yet, beyond advocacy and reform, her story also lingers in the intimate, personal ways. Friends remembering her laugh, siblings recalling her warmth, and parents holding on to photographs that capture a vibrant smile forever frozen in time. Jesse Matthew, condemned to live out his days behind bars, became a symbol not only of evil, but also of the system's failures. Warnings ignored, red flags brushed aside, opportunities for justice missed until it was too late. His incarceration could not undo the pain he caused, but it served as a grim reminder of the consequences of neglect. And so Hannah's legacy exists in two intertwined truths, one of unimaginable tragedy and one of enduring resilience. She vanished into the night, but her story never faded. Instead, it became a beacon, urging society to protect the vulnerable, to demand accountability, and to remember that even in the darkest shadows, the memory of one life can inspire change far beyond its years. Hannah Graham's name lives on, etched in sorrow, yes, but also in the unyielding pursuit of safety, justice, and remembrance.